What's up, everybody? This is Aaron Marshall. This is the Present Day Saint. I'm excited to be back with everybody and excited to be back with everybody. But topic is not one that I would love to talk about because I want to talk about today about the reality of I don't know, the Christian walk and what Francis Schaeffer called true spirituality. And I basically want to look at a short book that he wrote, or position paper that Francis Schaeffer wrote, called "The Two Contents, Two Realities." And I want to do that in conjunction with also talking about the news that came out last week about the suicide of Mike Adams. Mike Adams was a professor at UNC Wilmington, and a friend of mine, actually, who was good friends with him, was the one that was there last Thursday when he called the police and said he was worried for Mike. And the police came and they found his body, and they just confirmed yesterday or day before that it was suicide by gunshot. So I wanted to talk about that and just kind of process that a little bit. But then I kind of wanted to process through some of the reactions I've seen from both Christians and certainly non-Christians. And then I want to talk about this position paper that Schaeffer wrote, Two Contents, Two Realities, because I think that it has a lot to say about that. And I think the reality of this podcast almost is I think, almost titling it Confessions of an Apologist, or Confessions of, I want to call it Confessions of a Legalist. But I think it certainly as an apologist, because I just think, and I say this because I've been experiencing this, or maybe even over the last 2 months as we've been isolated because of Corona. I think that it's very easy for me as an apologist, and Mike was an apologist, was an adamant defender of the unborn, was very much, willing to challenge ideas. And I think it's easy for us to fall into the, I don't know if it's the trap is the right word, but to fall into the trap of this idea that the goal of the Christian life is to just have have good theology, have sound doctrine, have good apologetics answers, and miss out on this moment by moment lived love affair with Jesus. And I think that I don't know. I've been feeling that, and it's kind of, that was all kind of exacerbated by hearing the news about Mike. So let me go back, I guess, and just kind of talk about him, and just kind of when it happened. I posted that there would not be a Ratio Christi at UNC Wilmington if it weren't for Mike Adams. And so what I mean by that is, he's the one that basically introduced me to everybody. He's the one that helped me get everything set up in Wilmington. So I've told my story on the podcast before, but in 2009, discovered apologetics, started going to Southern Evangelical Seminary, and Ratio Christi was a ministry of Southern Evangelical Seminary at the time. It had been started by two college students at Appalachian State. One of them ended up going to SES, and so it became a ministry of SES, Southern Evangelical Seminary, for a couple of years. They didn't really know exactly what to do with it. I think there were maybe 6 or less than 10 Ratio Christi chapters across the country at the time, and it just kind of was just sitting there. And that's when a guy named Rick Schenker, who was a guy from up in Pennsylvania, was thinking about studying apologetics at SES, but saw Ratio Christi and said, man, this is a mass movement waiting to happen. This is what God is calling me to do, to take Ratio Christi out from underneath the umbrella of SES and make it its own 501c3 ministry. And so did that. And in 2011, Ratio Christi was birthed, became a 501c3. And so about that time, really the fall of 2011, the spring of 2011 is when I was began seriously considering coming on staff with Ratio. At the time, I had my own law firm, wasn't doing very successful. I mean, I knew apologetics was kind of what I wanted to do. So you're trying to run a law firm where your heart's not in it. It's not the best, not the most ideal business model. And so, but I knew, I thought, man, I think this is what I want to do, Ratio. And so I remember meeting have a meeting with Blake Anderson, who was, basically one of the two guys that were running the whole thing back then at a McAllister's near in Lake Norman, and just saying, what would this look like for us if we left the full-time practice of law and came on, with Ratio. And so we prayed about it. I went through some, a little bit of a crisis of faith, I remember at the time, and just with a lot of doubt and probably just fear. But we ended up saying, yes, that's what we're going to do. And so in that fall, we decided we were going to go to UNC Asheville. And so I made a bunch of connections up there. And then by December, it was time to either make the move or not. And for a variety of reasons, we decided not to. Turns out it was a really good decision for our family, because my wife was able to spend a lot of time with her grandmother over the next couple of months before she ended up dying from cancer. And so that was obviously a blessing. But then we were like, where are we going to go with Ratio Christi? I mean, where are we going to go? Where are we going to start a chapter? And we were looking really all over the place. And so we kind of, both of us thought about, what about Wilmington, North Carolina? I've been going to Wilmington or to Topsail Beach, which is right by Wilmington. I've been going there for years with my family. My grandparents had a beach house there, so I knew it a little bit. And so both of us are kind of like, what about Wilmington? So we made a drive out there. I'm like, man, this is, I think this could, let's kind of pursue it. Now, I didn't know anybody in Wilmington, except for, so in the fall of 2011, we had the very first Ratio Christi banquet or symposium or, national meeting. Now, it was like 30 or 40 of us in a band room at a church in Charlotte. So it's just funny, this was 10 years ago, or 9 years ago, and just, how much it's grown since then. But Mike Adams was one of the people that spoke at the conference at our symposium. And so, and I knew he was he talked about free speech, and anyways, he spoke at the conference. And so when we're thinking about Wilmington, I said, well, I don't know anybody, but I didn't even meet him, I don't think, at the conference, but I just said, I'll reach out to this guy, Mike Adams, and just see if he'd be interested in trying to help us get set up, or maybe he has some advice. So I reached out to him, and he, we met for lunch. It's funny, we met for lunch. There was a film crew doing a documentary on him. It was students from UNCW. And so we sat lunch at this pizza place, and this documentary crew filmed us the whole time. So it was super, it was kind of awkward, but kind of just a microcosm of sort of his life, which was interesting. But he said, look, I'll help you get this set up, and I will help you anyway. I'll introduce you to people, and I want to help bring Ratio to UNCW. So that summer, he would always, in the summer, he would go out to Colorado to a ministry called Summit Ministries, and he would live out there during the summer and do ministry there. So he basically just gave me a key to his house, and I went back and forth to Wilmington, multiple times, and would meet with people. And he introduced me to a bunch of people. He gave me a list of, I don't know, 10 or 20 people. He's like, these are the people you need to talk to. Some of our, people that have been supporting our ministry for, since then, that we met through him, met some of our good friends were just because of those, that he's here. Here's a list of people you need to talk to. And so the Simpsons, who ended up being like, just family to us, and Dr. Simpson was our faculty advisor at UNCW, and we met him. I remember we had a 4-hour breakfast with them the first time I talked with them. And the Huggins, who became good friends of our family, they were out here skiing in January, and just it's just all these people that we met just through him. And so really, Ratio Christi wouldn't exist at UNCW, and we wouldn't have gotten started there if it weren't for him. And then when we got started, we'd found one student, Madison Marston, now Madison McAllen. She's graduated and married and kids, but she was like a freshman at the time, and we I think she was just interested in babysitting our kids. But we kind of said, hey, can you help us start this ministry? And so she was helping us navigate that. And the school was pushing back on our membership or our being officially with the school, an official club, because we had the audacious idea that Christians should be in leadership positions for a Christian club, and they didn't think that was very inclusive. And so Mike actually was the one that helped us navigate that, and he pushed back on them, and he was, sending freedom of information requests to them. And very, very soon after that, we got a notification from the school that, hey, we won't be, you guys are fine. We won't be pressing this, and you guys will become an official club. So literally, he's the one that helped me meet people and get started, but also he was the one that helped us, become an official on-campus student club. And Madison, she tells the story about, one of our first meetings. I mean, just again, it was just a couple of us. Maybe it was just her and one or two other students, and then Mike and I, we were sitting there. We started talking about the pro-life position, and she was a freshman and hadn't really thought through this too much. And she said something along the lines of, I'm pro-life, but what about the rape exception and those kind of things, and who am I to tell the people they're wrong? And Mike challenged her on that, and she was actually reflecting about this on Facebook the other day, and just he challenged her on it, and she said that was kind of like the thing, that kind of the impetus to really start thinking better about this issue. And now she's become a pretty adamant defender of the unborn, and she's done a lot of pro-life work. And so it was just very impactful, just his just challenging her on that issue. And later, I think it was that year, it might've been the following spring, we ended up bringing the Genocide Awareness Project to a school, which is a pro-life group. And we had big pictures of abortions on campus. And obviously the school did not like that too much. And Mike was very instrumental in helping us sort of navigate that. And then just, and kind of talking about it afterwards. And then I think over the course of the next couple of years, I know we did at least 2 events with him. One was just a pro-life talk that we sponsored. And then the last event that we did before we ended up, the last event I did at UNC Wilmington before we moved out here to Wilmington, was we had set up an abortion debate between Mike and a Dr. Willie Parker, who was a professing Christian, but was also an abortion provider. And he said, he wrote in his book, Life's Work, or My Life's Work, that he did abortions to the glory of God. And he was worshiping when he was doing that. And so it needed to be answered and responded to. And so we agreed to do this, kind of help him set up this debate. And, it ended up being really cool because Summit Ministries got involved and they live streamed it. And I think I checked the other day, it has like 50,000 views on YouTube, the debate. And anyway, just really, it was really good. I mean, obviously, he just took the position down, took Dr. Parker down. And we heard from people afterwards that, obviously not everybody, but we heard from people that it did even change their position on the pro-choice position. They became pro-life. And so, that was the last kind of interaction I had with him before we moved out here to Utah. So, so then what happened, I guess, to kind of bring everything full circle, Mike was, he'd been writing articles for townhall.com and some other places for years, and, conservative sites. And he was very willing to challenge, he's adamant First Amendment defender and Second Amendment defender. And he was very willing to challenge people and students in his columns. And obviously that didn't rub everybody the right way at the university. And so the certain students on the left, and I think even, certainly administrators and colleagues of his at the university have been looking to get rid of him for years. And so in May, when all these, when Corona was shutting down everything, he put out a tweet, and you can find it find it online, but it was, he was engaging in hyperbole, and but doesn't always reflect well. And so people, just freaked out about that tweet, and then kind of just the firestorm started, and people started calling for his, for him being fired, as they'd been calling for years. But it gained a lot of momentum, and he had, there was a petition with like 200,000 names on it, wanting him fired, and actors who had acted in Wilmington on different shows were chiming in on it. And so he was getting death threats, and he was putting out he put out some things on Facebook, like, please, I need your prayers. And remember, I reached out to him just, on Facebook, just say, hey man, how you doing? Just praying for you. And he just was like, I need prayer, wasn't doing good. And so what basically everything was kind of coming to a head, and he ended up negotiating a settlement with the university. He was set to retire, I think, in 5 years. And so they just basically negotiated the settlement where he would retire early. Actually, it was going to be August 1st of this year. He would retire early. He'd get a settlement, and then he'd be done at UNCW. He was going to move to Charlotte, and he was dating a girl there, or a lady there. And I think they were engaged to be engaged. He talked about engagement rings I'd seen online. So, a lot of people look at that and like, well, okay, so he had won, so to speak. He's getting a bunch of money. He was probably set for life financially, and but he was still, he still wasn't doing well, I don't think, mentally. And so a friend of mine and some other people were reaching out to him just saying, I don't think he's not doing well. And evidently the weekend before, some friends had even gone to visit him because they were really worried about him. And then that Monday, same interaction. Then no one heard from him for 2 days. And then a friend of mine said he was driving over there. He hadn't heard from him. He was worried about him. And he said he knew that probably that's what had happened. And the police came and they were going to do a well check. And then like I said, they went in and they found him, and he had shot himself. Had a lot of weapons in a big safe. And so it's interesting. So a couple things, I mean, just as I'm just kind of reflecting on it. One is the reaction from, let's say from Christians. Well, let's say it this way. The reaction from the left, it just kind of just typifies, what problems. I mean, I've just seen some of the, like no one mourning this, SOB or whatever, just horrible things to say. I mean, he committed suicide. Let's, we mourn with those who mourn, especially if you're a professing Christian. But, over the left, for those that aren't Christians, the world reacts the way the world reacts. But I mean, think of the headlines, I saw an article where they compared the way that I forgot who it was, the New York Times or some liberal publication, the way that they the headline for when one of the Al-Qaeda terrorists died, and it said something like religious theologian or something died, versus with Mike it was professor who was putting out racist and homophobic tweets, controversial professor, who was racist and homophobic, committed suicide or died. So just the way that they even, in logic and reason, we talk about, either, poisoning the well or slanting, and just how, just the way that headline read, instead of just, so that was, indicative of just kind of what he had been dealing with for months, in really years, but certainly as the firestorm grew the last couple months. But just then online, like the comments, I mean, you want to go to the comment sections on any article about him, and you'll just see some of the nastiest stuff that people are saying, and for someone who's, and in the name of compassion and, supposedly from the left, just horrible things they're saying about, someone who committed suicide. And so I think that has been, I kind of what you expect, but just, it's still, but I mean, I saw colleagues of his at UNCW who tweeted, let's not more, make sure we don't forget this guy was a racist, and, all this, and just, so, and that was professing Christians. So that's been hard or interesting, to see, but a lot of Christians have responded. I mean, I've heard first of all, most people that I've seen, well, many people say this way, Christians were like, well, I know he didn't commit suicide because, he had, number one, he was against it. Like he was, and I've seen, what was it? Or people would say, wasn't, he was a Christian, how could he commit suicide? As if being a Christian exempts you from the vicissitudes of life, the heartache and all the things that go along with. I mean, think about over the last 3 months, if you think about his life, where he was basically isolated because of Corona. I mean, it's a separate thing I'd love to talk about, but a friend of mine said it back in March. He said, I bet you when all this is over, there'll be more people that have died by suicide that have died by Corona, certainly under a certain age, let's say under 50, or 60. And I think that's certainly been borne out. I mean, we've been isolated for months. And so you isolate people. We're not made to be in isolation, take people away from the body. Then you add on top of that death threats and all these other things. And the idea that so many Christians are like, well, he had money and he was, potentially going to marry this woman. And so he had money and, her, and so he should be happy. Is it as if that is what makes us happy? I mean, it's like, we used to talk about all the time at Ratio, I guess, still do, but we used to always use this example of this lady. She would tell the story, and I think it was in a Tim Keller book that I'd read, and she would tell a story about how she was an acting coach, or somehow she was involved with people who were, up and coming actors in New York City. And she said, I could tell you the story of three people. I could tell you three people right now off the top of my head. And if I told you their names, she said, you would know them in an instant. So they're well known Hollywood actors and actresses. And she said, when I knew them in New York, one was like a cab driver, another, I think she worked at the Macy's counter, makeup counter at Macy's. Another one was like a pizza delivery guy. And she said, when I knew them then, they were just excited and happy, and they were driven, and they knew what they wanted, and they wanted to be famous, and they wanted to be movie stars. And they knew that if they got that, they would be happy. And she says, and I know all of them, all three of them still today, and they're the most miserable people you'll ever meet, because they got the thing, fame, fortune, being a movie star. They got the thing that they thought would make them happy, and they realized that wasn't it. And Keller, I think, says, he says, the loneliest moment in your life will be when you spend your life climbing a wall, or a ladder that's placed on a wall, and you get to the top of that ladder and you realize you put your ladder on the wrong wall. And so for Christians to think that getting money and, married and everything, that's what it is. That's what it's all about. It's just like we bought into the American dream, and it's not the American dream. It's the American nightmare. And it's like, just because Mike had money and because he was going to get married, and like that solves all of our problems. I mean, we've missed the whole gospel, right? I mean, the whole gospel is talking about that the answer is Jesus. And so when I say confessions of an apologist, I guess what the reality for me this past couple months is that I was depressed, really depressed last couple weeks, or, maybe last month, and it just got this funk. And I think, we're isolated. We're not in, I've taken advantage, or I've taken relationships for granted for so long. And now when we don't have them, you realize just how important that is. But I think if I'm honest with myself, as an apologist, as a, even maybe as a theologian, certain people, but I think certainly as an apologist, that we spend so much of our time defending God's existence and defending the reliability of Scripture. And, we're out here talking, why Mormonism isn't true, that if we're not careful, we just forget to just love Jesus. And I worry that someone like Mike, who is very, who's much more like me than, that's sort of like my wife or something. With those of us who think like that, and, that we can make apologetics and all, that we can make that such an idol that we think that that's what it is to have a relationship with Jesus. And my relationship with him has been so dry those last couple months, and I was depressed, and I was, but I wasn't loving Jesus. I wasn't in this love affair, lived love affair with Jesus. We can talk about that in a minute, but this moment by moment need for Jesus. I was into my apologetics. And so I heard one theologian say one time, he said, most of us, and I think he's talking to people like me, and, we would rather go to lectures about Jesus, or lectures about God's existence, or, lectures about the Bible, than actually spend time with Jesus, read the Bible, and not just read it for knowledge, but read it to deepen our relationship with Jesus. And so, we see in Scripture that, the two greatest commands to love God and love others. It's not to have perfect theology. And so I want to be careful. Like, no one's, of course, and this is why I want to get into Schaeffer, what Schaeffer had to say, because he's saying it's not less than that, but it is certainly more than that. And I get it. I mean, so the other response that has been interesting for me, and I was talking to a friend of mine the other day, and he said the same thing, is that for whatever reason, there's been multiple people, men and women, but it was like our wives didn't really get it. They were like, well, I know Mike didn't kill himself because, he was adamantly against that. And, I just know he would never do that. And then other people, he committed suicide. He didn't commit suicide. He was killed because he would never do that. He was a Christian. He talked about that. He would never do that. And it's like, we're so unwilling to admit that we are broken people. We're so unwilling to admit how we are 3 or 4 or 5 decisions away, every one of us, from committing, the worst crimes or committing suicide. Every one of us, we're capable of it. And we think that we're beyond that because we're Christians. That doesn't mean anything. And so you take anybody with, if our relationship with Jesus is dried up, and we turned Christianity into a legalism of, thinking that it's just good theology, or, good apologetics. And then you combine that with isolation and not being in real relationships with Christian brothers, and not being vulnerable, and with Jesus and with others. And I mean, every one of us is capable of that. And so it's been frustrating to see Christians who just were like, oh, it had to be something else. There's no way, it's like, do you think that you're better than him? Do you think that there, but the grace of God go I, or any one of us? If you were, in his shoes, and you think you're single, you've got so many people all around you who profess to be your friends, but I'm sure in the middle of that, they're not, they're not reaching out to you the way you need, but you've got everybody attacking you. You're isolated. And, I just worry that his relation, I don't know his relationship with Jesus. I pray that it was, 1,000 times better than mine, but I just worry with Apologists, because I just know for me, and I know, interactions I've had with him and other apologists, that it's easy for us to let our relationship with Jesus go dry, and we turn it into just, I got to study. I'm studying theology. So I'm reading theology books, and I'm reading apologetics books, and, I'm studying about God, and I'm defending God's existence, but I'm not having a relationship with Jesus. And just combine all those together, and it makes perfect sense to me. And that's what's so frustrating. Our wives can't see that, or, not just my wife, but other people. But then you see these other people, like, I know he was killed, because he would never do that. And so, like, our pastor was preaching on, in Philippians this past week, Philippians 3. And, but he was just talking about, he's like, do you think that, how could we ever think that we've arrived? I mean, Christianity, Paul's, talking about, what I want to do, I do not do, and what I do not want to do, I do. I mean, the whole point of Christianity is that our need for a savior, and that doesn't end when we become a Christian. It's a day by day, moment by moment need of a savior. And so if we think, we were so, I would never do something like that, you're lying to yourself. We're all capable of the worst. If you don't think that you're capable of the worst sin, if you don't think you're the worst sinner than then we haven't grasped the gospel. And so I see these reactions, basically saying, well, he was a Christian, he was an adamant defender of life, whatever, so therefore he would never do that. Not realizing he was a human being that, I think was just what got broken through all this. And so it was interesting for me that it happened at the same time that I felt like I was kind of being broken. I just remember I was talking to one of our pastors about it. It's like, I was on the computer a lot, because obviously we're doing everything from home, but I was surfing I was on social media, and I'm surfing the news. And so you're just bombarded with all this information about how terrible life is, and the end of the world, and, all that kind of stuff. And then at the same time, my relationship with Jesus is, this sort of, stuffy, I'm learning information about you. I compare it to like saying I've got a good relationship with my wife because I've read her diary. No, I want to spend time with her and just love her. It's not just about knowing facts about her. And so, all this was happening to me. And I'm saying even those thoughts entered my mind. And I bet you half the men in those, Christian men in the country at some point, like, it's just entered your mind. Obviously, it didn't go to where Mike's went, but I'm saying, like, just the fact that it even entered my mind, it's just, I could just see, if you add 10 more things on my plate where, in a moment of weakness, that became an option for him. And so it's frustrating, I think, to hear Christians who are just so unwilling to admit how broken we all are, and how we need Jesus, but we don't just need to know facts about him. We need to know Jesus. And so, sort of transitioning to Schaeffer's book here, I've been reading his book, True Spirituality, and it's just really challenged me on all this. And it was like it's a cool drink of water in the desert, because, like I said, I was just dry, and it was just challenging me. And Schaeffer basically went through this faith crisis where he's like, I knew all this apologetic stuff, but I didn't know Jesus. And, so he wrote True Spirituality. And then he wrote this position paper called Two Contents, Two Realities. And the two contents, he said, the first one is sound doctrine. Second one is honest answers to honest questions. And the first reality is true spirituality. And the second reality is the beauty of human relationships. And so I think, I as an apologist, we're great at the first two: sound doctrine, sound theology, sound apologetics. That's what we talk about, and honest answers to honest questions. And I think that's why we do Ratio Christi, and that's what, and so certainly, Christianity is not just, believing things that we don't have evidence for. It's not just don't ask questions, just believe. It's not that. It's Christianity is true, and Christianity has answers to your questions. So there are no questions that are off limits, and we believe it's a reality in space and time that Jesus existed and was the Son of God and died on a cross and rose from the dead, and these are true facts. Or Schaeffer called it true truth, and so those answers and those things are so important, and this honest answers to honest questions. Like we've done a disservice to our kids when we tell them you can't ask questions. And Ratio, we had this mantra, ask good questions, seek good answers. Don't ever, if anybody tells you don't ask questions, run from that person, because that's how cults are born. And so just the idea that Christianity is anti-intellectual and all that, that's what we spend so much of our time challenging and saying, no. I mean, the idea of clear doctrinal positions and honest answers to honest questions. I mean, that's, he said that's foundational, right? That's the two contents. But then he says, but the two realities. And he said, the first one is true spirituality. And he said, we can have all the great correct propositions. Well, he said this, the end of Christianity is not the repetition of mere propositions. Without the proper propositions, you cannot have that which should follow. But after having the correct propositions, the end of the matter is to love God with all the hearts and souls and minds, and then love others as ourselves. So we can spend all of our time getting, the right answers to these questions, and then forget to love God and forget to rest in Jesus and it's about loving God and loving others. And I know that that's just been true of me, right? Where, Schaeffer said, I discovered the meaning of the work of Christ, the meaning of the blood of Christ, the moment by moment in our lives after we are Christians, the moment by moment work of the whole Trinity in our lives, because as Christians, we are indwelt by the Holy Spirit. He said, that is true spirituality. So he said, look, we're not minimizing the intellectual, right? Just the two contents, right? But at the same time, there must be a spiritual reality. And he said, will it be perfect? Of course not. Nobody's perfect. And that's where this, sinless perfectionism that so many of us, especially those of us that are type A, that we fall into. But there must be something real of the work of Christ in the moment by moment life, something real of the forgiveness of specific sin brought under the blood of Christ, something real in Christ's bearing. And he said, this is the first reality that I call spiritual reality. Or true spirituality. And he spends this whole, maybe I'll go through his book, True Spirituality, through the podcast. But that, anyway, I just know for me how easy it is for me to miss all of that. And I just worry that, and when you miss that, it's how you just feel hopeless, because without Jesus, we are hopeless. And it's not getting answers. It's not apologetics and theological answers that's the hope. It's Jesus that's the hope. And if I don't have a relationship with Jesus, and I'm speaking about myself, and I just worry that these are the things that were probably going on with Mike as well, that I'm missing out, that how easy it is for my relationship to be dry, and then my relationships with God and relationships with others suffer. And I know that because I know that happened to me, again, over this last month. And we're seeing all kinds of stats about the number of about depression and suicide and all these things that are happening to people because we're isolated. So that's the next, the reality, he says that, so there's a spiritual reality that has to be true of this moment by moment lived love affair with Jesus. Do I love Jesus? I can say I love my wife and I can say I love my kids, but the old sort of the I don't know, saying, but how do kids spell love? Time, right? It's just, do I spend time with them? Do I love my wife? And I'm guilty of just, not spending time with people. My wife, my kids, I'm doing lots and lots of stuff, and I'm neglecting the most important relationships. And the most important relationship is my relationship with Jesus. If I could look back at my life over the last year, and you could get into my mind and, how I spent my time, would you say that I loved Jesus? Or would you say that I loved talking about Jesus, or I love defending Jesus, or I love those are two different things. And I just, 1,000% feel the weight of that. And so they said the second reality is the beauty of human relationships, right? Two greatest commandments, love God and love others. So there's the spiritual reality, true spirituality. And then there's this, the beauty of human relationships. He says true Christianity produces beauty as well as truth, especially in the specific area of human relationships. And he says, like, he specifically doesn't use the word love, because love is so misunderstood in our culture today, right? I mean, love is willing the good for somebody else. And so the beauty of human relationships is this, that God has designed us to be in relationship with each other. Why? Because we're made in his image. He's, Trinitarian. So we're made for relationships with others. And this is the way that God has designed that we would share the gospel with other people. So we are made to be in relationship with other people. And in our culture today, and I'm just so guilty of this, we just turn relationships into, ways to get what we want, but not real relationships. And so I've taken for granted relationships, especially in Corona has helped me to see that. So he says, look, I'm talking about relationships with non-Christians. The first commandment is to love the Lord God with all our heart, soul, and mind. And the second is to love our neighbor as ourselves. So every man, he says, is to be treated on the level of truly being made in the image of God, because they are. And thus there is to be a beauty of human relationships that deals with the way in which we interact with anybody. So he says, we approach a red light. We have the same problems. Perhaps we will never see the other people at the intersection again, but we are to remember that they have dignity, that they are made in the image of God, right? And that their greatest need is to know Jesus, to love Jesus, to have this love affair with Jesus. And so how do we do that? How do we think differently about relationships with that kind of in the back of our mind? What about longer relationships? Relationships with people that we're in contact all the time with. Maybe they're not believers. He says there should be something about the way in which we love them that makes them want to know what's different about this person. And I promise you, that's not going to be because they've got great theology or they can give us all these apologetics answers. There's got to be something more that just exudes from us, this love of Jesus. And he says, no, but if that's true of our non-Christian relationships, what about for those of us that are Christians in our Christian relationships? He says, now, if we are called upon to love our neighbor as ourselves when he is not a Christian, how much more, 10,000 times, 10,000 times more, should there be beauty in the relationships between true Bible-believing Christians, something so beautiful that the world would be brought up short. All right, he says, I emphasize, if we do not show beauty in the way we treat each other as believers, then in the eyes of the world, in the eyes of our own children, we are destroying the truths we proclaim. So I can proclaim the truths all day long, but if I'm not loving, people, the old adage, people don't care what you know unless they know that you care. And it's easy for us to just miss that, and so this challenge for us to just, so basically he says we need two orthodoxies. We need first an orthodoxy of doctrine. And I think historically, Ratio Christi and, certainly me, like that's where I've focused. But he says we need an orthodoxy of community. And I think if nothing else, what God has shown me over the last, 3 or 4 months is how, as an apologist, how easy it is for us to neglect that. And because when the wind and the rain comes, not if, but when, we need people around us who love us, that because we've poured into them, and then so that they will in turn, pour into us. One of the marks of the early church was this real community, a community that reached down all the way to the care for each other and their material needs at the most basic level. So, the early Acts 2, we were having this discussion on a Ratio Christi meeting recently. It wasn't communism because it wasn't forced by the government. It was a desire by everybody I just want to love on you. And how can I love you? Well, I want to provide for your material needs. But they weren't being forced to do it. It was out of an overflow of their love for Jesus that they were loving their, fellow Christians. And so, it's just, and so I think about that in all these different areas of my life. He says, the sort of way he ends it. I just like the way he ends it. He says, so there must be two orthodoxies, the orthodoxy of doctrine and the orthodoxy of community. And both orthodoxies must be practiced down into the warp and the woof of life, where the lordship of Lord Jesus touches every area of our life. He says, thus there are 4 requirements if we are to meet the needs of our generation. They are the 2 contents and then the 2 realities. And when there are the 2 contents and the 2 realities, we will begin to see something profound happen in our generation. And I think, one of the things we always talk about is sort of the 2 contents, with Ratio and as apologists, but it's easy for us to neglect the 2 realities. And I think this generation specifically is it's all. And so when we're out here, in Utah, we talked about challenging evangelicals in LDS to true spirituality. And I think that's what that means. And so the first thing I would do is challenge myself. And that means repenting of all the areas where I've fallen short in that, certainly as an apologist. And I just, it takes something like, Mike's suicide to realize just how important, human relationships are, and how important it is to be, to be just a loving, grace-filled person. I think, I'm such a legalist, if I'm honest with myself, about the way I'm handling certain relationships, even now, where people aren't doing exactly what I think they should do. So it's just easy for me to just judge them. But I think about my testimony. Part of, my and my wife's testimony is, we were both of us divorced, and she's pregnant, and we're, as messed up, alcoholics. We're as messed up as you can be. And we go to this church, and they just loved on us, and they loved on us the way they said, look, what you're doing is sin, but there's grace and there's mercy at the cross. And I think it's so easy for me just to be a legalist in my relationships and just turn everything into a judgment. And but if I don't think I'm the worst sinner that I know, then I'm not. I realize, and I think I'm better than everybody else, then I've missed the whole point of the gospel. The gospel is I'm the worst sinner I know, and I'm 5 steps away from making a terrible decision. And I think when we feel lonely, we feel lost, and we feel like there's no hope, then, suicide becomes an option. But if we recognize who we are in Jesus, and we recognize this love affair with Jesus is reality, and that happens, and to the point where my relationship with him is so strong that, I'm just so focused on loving him and loving others that just wouldn't even be an option, And so I just, I feel like the church and, Christians, like, we've let down other believers. Mike needed people to just be there to love on him. And there were lots of people that were, so I'm not saying that, there were lots of people that were doing their best to love on him. But at the same time, we as Christians need to recognize that, especially for a certain breed of us, some of you listen to this, that's just not your problem. But for some of us, 1,000% me included, that we think getting an A on a theology exam or an apologetics exam is what Christianity is. And it's just not. And so, really wants me to, challenging me this year to, am I introducing people to Jesus? Am I introducing them to the Jesus who loves them because he loves them because he loves them? And then if I need apologetic answers, awesome. And we want to challenge, we need to have good theology and doctrine and all that. But there should be this beauty of human relationships and this true spirituality, this, live, love affair with Jesus that should mark us as Christians. And so, anyway, so that's just kind of my thoughts about, kind of all of that kind of came together, over the last couple of weeks. And so I'm really praying that God would just, just almost take me down. Like Schaeffer talked about, he said, I had a crisis of faith and it almost took me down to the core and just kind of rebuilt my faith. And I'm praying that God would do that with me, and that, that the mark, when people would encounter me, they would say, I don't know, maybe I don't like him, maybe whatever, but he loves people. He loves Jesus. Not that he can answer my apologetics arguments. That's not the first thing that people say. And, if I'm honest, that's probably not true of me. It's certainly not true of me right now in all my relationships. And so that's what I got to work on. But in doing that, I just, that's part of what it is. That's sanctification. That's part of what it is to be a Christian, that Jesus paid for my sins, and that I'm a work in progress, and I will be a work in progress for the rest of my life. And I'm being okay with that. So anyway, so I think that's, kind of what I wanted to say about, about all those kind of things kind of combined, and, just praying for friends and family of Mike, that, and all of, I was talking to a friend of mine, and it's just people that, everyone I know seems like knows somebody who's committed suicide in the last couple of months. And so if you're listening to this and you're thinking about, I pray that you would reach out to me, reach out to somebody, that you would just let people, know that you could be in relationship with the people. But I just pray also that you would rest in Jesus, and a real love affair with Jesus, that we can't manufacture that. That doesn't come from just, learning theology. It comes from just spending time with them and pouring into them. And so I'm trying to go back and just rereading the Gospels. My friend Tom was saying the same thing, just rereading the Gospels over and over. And so that's kind of the next thing I want to do. And maybe I'll go through the book Yeshua, where just kind of a harmony of the Gospels that Arnold Fruitbaum wrote, because it's been really a helpful book for me. But just point, who was Jesus like, and what do you think about Jesus, and blowing away lots of misconceptions we all have of Jesus, certainly me included. So anyway, so I hope this was, a little bit of deep dive a little bit into my psychology, and I think the psychology of many apologists. And so I think we need to, if that's true of us, then we repent and we recognize that that it's about Jesus and a relation, love of Jesus. That's everything we're doing, not just being able to give good answers to honest questions, although it's not less than that. And that's the key thing. It's those two contents and those two realities. I really like how Schaeffer worded that. And that's going to be the mantra of our ministry out here, is that we try as best we can, obviously failing miserably most of the time, but as best we can, kind of embodying all four of those. And I know that it'll be easier for two of them. And, I got a lot more work to do on the other two, and just praying that God would challenge me and use people in my life to challenge me on those things. So if you like what you're hearing on the podcast, please, like and subscribe to what we're doing, the podcast on iTunes and wherever else you get your podcasts. And I hope that you will continue to listen to what we've got going on. If you like what you're hearing and you want to help continue to hear the for me to produce the podcast, then we'd love for you even to support the ministry that we're doing, the Ratio Christi out here in Utah. We've got lots of big plans for the future. And so if you'd be interested in supporting us on a monthly basis, please, you can email me, aaronmarshall@ratiochristi.org. And I would love to answer any questions you have and help you get set up on that. We are trying to raise some more support right now. And we're looking for people doing $25 a month, $50 a month. So it's not like you have to, do huge donations, although certainly we would take them. But if we had, I think right now, if we had 80 people doing $25 a month, that would get us to where we need to be financially, so we continue to do this full time. So if that works, if it works in your budget, we'd love to talk to you about that. But please pray for us, pray for the ministry out here. I mean, I think there's definitely been some spiritual attacks, certainly on me. I felt it out here, and we're just praying that God would use this time to kind of build, probably deconstruct some things, and certainly in my life, and then reconstruct them, and that we could be just really ready to go when school starts back up, and just talk to people about Jesus, which I'm excited about doing over the next couple of years, certainly out here in Utah. So anyway, so thanks for listening to this episode of the Present Day Saint. This is Aaron Marshall signing off.